After tomorrow, you stop calling him your son. Those were the exact words my son's fiancée breathed into my ear the night before their wedding. I stayed home the next day in pieces, but before the sun reached its highest point, the ceremony unraveled completely, and the reason why left every guest whispering in disbelief. The night before everything collapsed, I believed I was standing at the doorway of the proudest moment of my life and the happiest one of his. I was wrong. Hope has a way of dressing itself in certainty just before it quietly betrays you. Tonight, for 28 years, it was just the two of us against the world, my boy and me. I took extra shifts, swallowed dreams, and learned how to turn pennies into meals and worry into silence. When his father left, Daniel was still small enough to ask when he was coming home. I smiled and lied. Then I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until my knees gave out. From that moment on, I became everything. I worked nights at a distribution warehouse and mornings at a diner. I learned how to smile when my body felt like it might break in half. I learned how to turn exhaustion into encouragement. When Daniel struggled with math, I sat beside him every night until numbers stopped scaring him. When he doubted himself, I reminded him that even storms eventually run out of rain. Daniel grew into the kind of man who opened doors for strangers and stayed late to help classmates. When he told me he wanted to study law, not for money, but to defend people who were ignored, I felt something inside my chest unlock. I believed every sacrifice had found its purpose. The first time he brought Emily home, I wanted to welcome her with everything I had left. She was poised, beautiful, and frighteningly composed. Her smile never reached her eyes. In public, she was effortless charm. In private, she spoke to me like I was a backdrop, something permanently out of focus. Every subtle comment, every dismissive pause, every polite exclusion was small enough to dismiss on its own. Together, they formed a quiet warning I refused to hear. The engagement only widened that invisible distance. I was invited to nothing that required trust. No shopping, no planning, no decisions. When I offered to help, Emily always smiled and said everything was handled. Daniel insisted it meant nothing. I believed him because believing him hurt less than the alternative. The night before the wedding, after her words carved me open, I went home and sat with Daniel's childhood in my hands. I decided I would not go back to be humiliated in silence. So the morning came, and I stayed behind. At 10:42 a.m., my phone rang for the first time after hours of silence. It was my sister, breathless. She said, "The ceremony hasn't started. Something's wrong." At 11:07, she called again. This time, she was crying. She said, "The wedding is off," she whispered. "Daniel found out everything." My body felt hollow as she told me what unraveled behind those church doors. Less than 30 minutes before the ceremony, Daniel's best friend had shown him images sent anonymously from a locked account. The photos were recent. Emily in a hotel room, Emily with another man. The timestamps confirmed everything Daniel had feared, but never allowed himself to believe. When he confronted her in the bridal suite, she denied it first. Then she pleaded, then she blamed. But the truth had already taken shape. The guests sensed it before it was spoken. Whispers reached the altar before the bride ever did. And when Daniel walked out alone, his voice barely steady as he canceled the ceremony, the entire church fell into stunned silence. By noon, the story spread faster than grief ever could. But the version the world heard was not the truth. By evening, Emily's family had already begun reshaping the narrative. Posts appeared online. A weeping bride deserted at the altar. A controlling mother who ruined a love story. My name wasn't mentioned, but my shadow filled every sentence. A photo of Emily in her gown, mascara running, caption with a single line. Sometimes the people who say they love you poison everything. The crowd chose a villain quickly. It was easier than accepting what had really happened. And so the war of perception began. The first accusation reached me before midnight. A message from a distant cousin I barely spoke to. Is it true you told Daniel not to marry her? I stared at the screen, unable to shape a response. By morning, the messages multiplied. People who once borrowed sugar from my kitchen were now unsure whether to trust me. Daniel came to my house that afternoon. His face drained of color I had only ever seen missing when he was a child with a fever. He sat on my couch, hands clasped together like he was holding himself in place. He told me, "They're blaming you," he said quietly. I nodded. I already knew. Nadia explained that Emily's father had been involved in multiple failed ventures over the past decade. Lawsuits, insolvencies, debts tied into names that quietly disappeared. The marriage to Daniel was not just love, it was leverage. The prenuptial agreement Emily insisted on was layered in complexity that most people would never read closely. Daniel had signed nothing yet, but had the wedding proceeded, his future income would have been vulnerable in ways he never realized. The affair was betrayal. The finances were strategy. The messages grew uglier as the days passed. Anonymous accounts sent threats. Some wished me dead. Some told me I deserved to die alone. I unplugged my phone for an entire night and sat in the dark like the world had closed in around a single lie. Daniel tried to shield me, but he was drowning too. He had lost the woman he trusted and the future he imagined in the same hour. I saw the guilt fight the anger in his eyes, because people had convinced him that I was somehow responsible for the destruction of a truth I had not created. And still, Emily's family pushed harder. A week after the wedding that never happened, they invited Daniel to a private discussion at an upscale hotel downtown. They claimed they wanted peace. He knew they wanted control. He begged me not to come. He didn't want me in another room full of accusations, but I knew silence was the only weapon they still believed I carried. So I went. I wore the dress I had bought for the wedding, the one meant for a celebration that never arrived. I walked into that hotel lobby with my spine straight and my fear carefully hidden. Emily was already there, flawless as glass. Her parents sat beside her like guardians of a throne built on resentment. The moment they saw me, the temperature in the room changed. Her father spoke first. "We can resolve this quietly if you cooperate." His meaning was clear. Quiet meant my surrender. I asked only one question. Are you prepared for the truth to no longer belong only to you? Emily smiled thinly. You don't have the power you think you do. I opened my folder. The documents inside did not raise voices. They erased them. Records of hidden debts, bank links, property transfers, email chains discussing Daniel's career as an asset. One sentence from her father's correspondence froze the room in place. The moment the marriage is legal, we stabilize our future. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't need to. The air itself fractured. Emily stood slowly. You were never supposed to see those, she said. That was her only defense. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Her mother cried, her father shouted. Emily stood very still, as if stillness were the only shield she had left. Daniel remained seated, eyes hollow but fixed. When he finally stood, his voice did not rise. It broke cleanly through the room like quiet glass. "You didn't love me," he said. "You calculated me." Emily stepped toward him, her control slipping at last. "You don't understand what pressure does to people." Daniel shook his head. "My mother does, and she never sold me because of it." Those words ended the room. We left without another sentence. Emily followed us into the parking lot. She called Daniel's name again and again as if repetition could resurrect what trust had built. He never turned back. By the following morning, the truth had reached a journalist Nadia contacted quietly. The article did not scream. It laid facts like stones. Financial records, the affair, the prenuptial motives. Within 24 hours, Emily's public image collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The backlash was swift. Sponsors pulled away. Her employer placed her on leave pending investigation. Her father's name surfaced alongside debts he could no longer hide. And yet, the most painful moment came in silence. Daniel sat at my kitchen table staring at nothing long after the storm hit the world. He said, "I almost believed them. They almost made me choose wrong." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Not with triumph, not with anger, only with relief that he was still here. But consequences do not arrive neatly wrapped. Emily filed a civil claim weeks later, not for money, but for image damage. She wanted to publicly tether my name to hers one final time. The case was weak. The intention was not. The courtroom that day smelled of paper and stale air. She stood across from me, dressed in quiet elegance, the perfect picture of composure resurrected. The judge listened. The evidence unfolded. The decision arrived quickly and without mercy. The claim was dismissed. Emily did not look at me as she left. Daniel did. I expected closure to feel loud. Instead, it felt empty. Victory has a way of leaving the room before gratitude can unfold. In the weeks that followed, the stories faded. The noise moved on to new scandals, new villains, new faces. But inside our house, the echoes remained. Daniel began to rebuild his life in pieces. New job interviews, new apartment searches, new versions of himself that did not depend on someone else's ambition. And for the first time in years, he told me everything he had hidden. Every doubt, every fear of disappointing me, every moment he doubted whether he deserved the sacrifices that had built him. We cried together in a way we never had before, not as mother and son defined by survival, but as two people released from a lie that nearly swallowed them both. Emily vanished from our daily lives after that. No messages, no threats, just the quiet absence of someone who once believed she controlled the direction of our future. And yet, something lingered. The knowledge that love can be mistaken for alignment, and that betrayal does not always arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives dressed as a promise. For a while, peace settled into unfamiliar corners of our home. It was not loud or triumphant. It was careful. We moved through it like people do after earthquakes, unsure if the ground would stay still.
Friends returned slowly. Some apologized, some avoided the subject entirely. I accepted both. The truth had carved its own place in the world, whether people chose to stand beside it or not. One afternoon, months later, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was the scrapbook I had hidden under my bed the night Emily told me I no longer belonged. No note, no explanation, only the album placed carefully in brown paper. Daniel found it on the kitchen table when he came home. He didn't open it right away. He sat beside it for a long time, fingers resting on the cover as if its contents might unravel something fragile. "I never saw this," he said quietly. "It was meant for you, just not like this." He opened it slowly. Page by page, his life unfolded in pieces he had not touched in years. He smiled at some, he cried at others. When he reached the last page, he closed the book and pulled me into his arms. "I was almost fooled into forgetting where I came from," he whispered. I said nothing. Some truths only need to be held. The following winter, I received a letter from Emily. It was not an apology. It was not an accusation. It was a single paragraph acknowledging that the world had not turned out as she assumed it would be. I did not respond. Daniel began to fall in love again, slowly. Not with desperation, not with fantasy, with patience. With someone who did not treat his past like excess weight. I watched him heal in quiet increments, and I learned that survival does not mean remaining unchanged. It means allowing yourself to shift shape without losing your center. Sometimes, late at night, I would replay that moment in the hallway where Emily whispered her sentence into my life like a verdict. The words no longer hurt. They echoed differently now. They sounded hollow. Because family is not revoked by demand. It is retained by truth. By the next morning, the world already felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier in a strange, unsettled way. I woke up before the sun, the kind of waking that isn't really rest, just your mind refusing to let you sleep anymore. The house was silent, too silent. No footsteps, no wedding day rush, no phone buzzing with last-minute panic. Just me, the quiet, and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall that suddenly sounded too loud. I made myself a cup of tea out of pure habit. The kettle screamed in the kitchen, and for a second, I jumped at the sound like I'd been caught doing something wrong. My hands shook as I poured the water. I told myself it was just because I hadn't eaten, but I knew better. It was the weight of everything I hadn't said the night before, everything I'd swallowed to keep the peace that no longer existed. By mid-morning, my phone finally came alive. Messages stacked up like falling dominoes. Questions, confusion, rumors. Someone sent a blurry photo of the empty wedding venue. Another forwarded a screenshot of a family group chat I hadn't been invited back into yet. "Wedding postponed," it said. Postponed. As if the truth were something that could be delayed like bad weather. Then Daniel called. His voice was raw. Not angry, not loud, just cracked. Like something inside him had finally split open. Mom, he said, barely a breath, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter, the cold tile grounding me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Years of trust, love, and misunderstanding hung between us in the quiet. He told me everything they showed me this morning. The money, the contracts, the lies, everything she and her family planned. His voice broke on the last word. They were never marrying me. They were marrying my future. That's when it hit me. Not as shock, as grief. Deep, aching grief for the boy who once believed love was simple. Daniel came over that afternoon. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just stripped of all the confidence he'd been wrapped in for months. When he stepped inside the house, he stopped in the doorway like he wasn't sure he still belonged there. That nearly shattered me. I thought you were the only one I could trust. You always could. You just forgot for a while. We sat at the table, where I had once balanced bills and birthdays and scraped me tears. Papers were spread out now. Legal documents. Proof. The cold, ugly remains of a beautiful lie. He kept apologizing over and over, like guilt could be sanded down with repetition. Then the truth started spreading faster than any wedding invitation ever could. Friends called. Distant relatives suddenly remembered my name. People who had once smiled politely at the wedding plans now spoke with outrage on my behalf. Some defended me loudly, some quietly, some only after the story became impossible to deny. But the silence from one person was louder than all of it. Her. No more messages. No more threats. No more whispers. Just emptiness where arrogance once lived. That night, long after Daniel fell asleep in his old room, I sat alone in the living room. The same chair, the same lamp, the same silence, but it didn't feel the same anymore. I realized something then that surprised me. I wasn't broken. Bruised, yes. Hurt, deeply. But not broken. The woman who had been told she was extra baggage was still standing, still breathing, still needed, still loved. And somewhere between heartbreak and truth, I had found something stronger than anger. I had found my worth again. In the days following the shattered engagement, Lydia and her parents did not go quietly. Messages poured in at all hours. First came the legal threats, thick with official language meant to intimidate. Then came the apologies, trembling and poorly disguised. Her father warned Daniel of consequences. Her mother cried into my voicemail, begging me to convince him to reconsider. Lydia herself swung wildly between fury and pleading, one moment promising revenge, the next insisting she still loved him. But it no longer mattered, because this time the truth was no longer hidden behind closed doors or polite smiles. This time the story was allowed into the light. With the help of a friend who worked in investigative media, I shared every document, every message, every clause they hoped no one would read. Within days, the headline spread. The broken wedding and the family behind it, exposed. The article laid out everything. The buried debts, the manipulative contracts, the quiet pressure that had boxed Daniel into a corner. For the first time, the public did not see a heartbroken bride. They saw a calculated plan unravel. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The comments changed. People asked how a mother could be erased after a lifetime of sacrifice. They questioned motives they once defended. The sympathy I had been denied flowed back in steady waves. Daniel still carried the scars, but he also found his footing. He threw himself into rebuilding his career and his confidence piece by piece. Slowly, the fear drained from his eyes. One evening, sitting beside me in the quiet of our living room, he took my hand. "I don't know how you held on. I almost lost myself." I answered the only way a mother can. By loving you when it was easy, and when it wasn't. He nodded, tears shining, and leaned his head against my shoulder. In that moment, I knew the storm had finally passed. The wedding was gone. The illusion was gone. But what remained was real. A bond that no contract, no threat, no betrayal could ever break. It was not the ending I imagined,